I'm very pleased for the first time at the event here that we can have Chris Mattingly, who is Vice President of Transportation for Stellantis North America. Christopher has been with various incarnations of the company, shall we say, going back to Chrysler, Daimler Chrysler, FCA, over the past 35 plus years in a variety of roles in supply chain, logistics, and purchasing. And so very pleased that Christopher can join us today from Stellantis. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Yeah, please, why don't you have a seat here. Also joining us from Tier 1 supplier, Greg Megerian, Director of Logistics at Adient. More than 15-year career in the Tier 1 supply chain and responsible across logistics for the Americas there. Greg, thanks so much for joining. Thank you. Bringing a perspective from outside the specific automotive industry, but of course with a lot of common traits in the supply chain. Greg Toornman, who is Vice President of Global Material Logistics and Demand Planning with a global role at Agco Corporation. Greg, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks so much, Greg. And last but certainly not least, from a logistics provider, Michael Andersen, who's Vice President for Automotive Industry Vertical, amongst a number of other verticals in North America for Maersk. Maersk, of course, super important container shipping line, but also increasingly on integrated logistics. So Michael, thank you so much for joining on our panel today.
Thanks. To the end.
Thank you. Please join. Okay, so I hope you will participate and use this opportunity. Oh, excuse me, this opportunity as well to join me in reflecting with our panel. But I'll kick us off as ever, and I just want to get a bit of real-life context, if you like, in looking across your operations. Where do you currently identify some of the key risks that you're working to mitigate, whether by region, transport mode, commodity? Maybe the answer is obvious given what we've been discussing, but I think it's always good to hear directly from the source. So Christopher, I want to start with you from Stellantis on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got obviously a lot of risk, right? We've got a lot of initiatives that we're working on with specifically a couple of railroads. We're working with the ocean vessel guys on a couple of issues that we have from a capacity perspective. But the one issue that really concerns me moving forward in the future is driver capacity, especially on the haul-away part of the business. Many of you know we own our own dry van fleet. We also have in Canada we've got our own auto-away business that we operate. We're struggling, especially in Canada, to get drivers that have that experience with auto haul-away. So some of the initiatives that we've been taking on, because we have enough dry van drivers, is to convert those guys into auto haul-away, and that's been actually pretty successful for us. Now it takes us time to get to the training that we need to get in order to make that happen, but so we have some experience with that. So that's been a good initiative for us.
Yeah.
We've also been working with our providers to help them with recruiting events. So we did a couple of joint partnerships where we worked with them on how we're going to communicate. We got on radio and did ads, and we tried to work as a partner to attract drivers to come in and handle the automotive part of the business. So, but really the biggest issue, we need to get that steady pipeline of drivers, and I'm not sure where we're going to get that. We're exploring a lot of different things. One of the initiatives that we're looking at is, can we partner with local high schools and community colleges and offer to train people to be drivers for us in the future and get some sort of commitment from them to be able to support the capacity. But we need that steady flow because there's no pipeline right now.
That's such an important point and a key risk factor, and that's really interesting. So you're converting some of those drivers who were on the inbound side to haul-away drivers, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah.
It's a lot more complex. Weather is always an issue, in Michigan especially, that you have to overcome. So it's not an easy thing, but we have found volunteers, people who are interested in it. You got to find the right person that's willing to work in that environment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Christopher. So, Greg, from Adient point of view, some identifying key risks. Yeah, I know, and that will be a challenge. The Gregs, but Greg from Adient.
Yeah, I mean, where have we not seen risk in the last couple of years? I mean, everything from an earthquake last week to, now cyber attacks. Weather has always been an issue, blockades, violence. It just seems like it's nonstop, and really it's around there's an obstacle around every corner. Every time you think, okay, here we got some stability, it turns out it's the calm before the storm, right? And so what we have tried to do, and I think we've been pretty successful, all things considered, was eliminate surprises, right? We know there's risk. We know that at any time something can go wrong, and we need to, eliminate any surprise and understand what, where we're going to have to react quickly if when the next thing happens.
Yeah. Greg from Agco, where would you identify risks right now?
So we're really focusing on what are the future risks going to be from a business continuity perspective. And with that, being able to look from a global perspective at different scenarios that could pose risk, that could also become solutions if a risk did come up. And when you look at the 3,000 plus direct material suppliers that we've got our work cut out for us to understand what can they do from a capacity perspective, what can they do from a business continuity perspective. These type of developments take time, investment, and a long-term strategy. So we're trying to really focus on two things at once. How do we fight through the challenges and headwinds that all of our organizations are facing today at a tactical level? But secondly, how do we build a future that's a bit more robust and a bit more intelligent to understand our network ability to manage risk from a business continuity, because these things that have happened will likely continue to happen, in some cases maybe grow in complexity for organizations. And when you're supporting the global food chain, that's something that many people take for granted, but there's still going to be 20 to 30 million people this year that likely die of starvation. So not only are we doing this for our business, we're doing this for a lot of people.
I'll come back on a few of those points, Greg, but just to round up from our panel, Michael from Maersk, where are you pinpointing and identifying key risks right now?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So just digress, but I'll address the question directly. So when I think we had to tear up the playbook, and it's been the common theme throughout the last 2 years as to what took place with Maersk, and Chris was nice enough to introduce us as a logistics provider. Around 2018, our CEO said that from a carrier perspective, which was typically ocean, the CY to CY piece, we are going to become in a transformation to the integrator of container logistics. And where it relates to the question, I think managing the risk at origin in terms of ability to provide a lot of talk about visibility, that too, but also the work that needs to go and get done with the suppliers to be able to provide those services, get the right parts, right container, right time, mode of transport, all of that, managing the POs, those sorts of things, but then also on the destination side, which I know ocean capacity was as a premium, and a lot of companies ended up, our peers in the industry, the rates went up, the market rates, the cost, that obviously skyrocketed. Our strategy and hopefully long-term to mitigate risk is we didn't make everybody happy, but we stuck with our long-term clients and our long-term contracts. And it was a decision that probably cost the company in the short term $3 to $4 billion not to go to the spot market and take advantage of the heights. Our margins were still up, no doubt. But now the ability to mitigate risk, and as we see going forward, is the destination as well as managing what happens once that vessel arrives, and that equipment, getting it delivered, and the moniker for that is really transported and then fulfilled, which I know we'll peel back a little later, and then delivered by Maersk. So it's quite a transformation, and it definitely is tied into the needs of the market, and most specifically the automotive industry, which represents for us a great opportunity. A lot of people use the word partnership, and I think collaboration is more appropriate to really understand everyone's unique supply chain needs, and especially as we see things changing again, where do we move forward together collaboratively?
Thank you, Michael. Greg from Agco, just to pick up on what you talked about, a lot more focus on business continuity and how that appeals. Is that a focus via some specific tools or change in processes? Can you give us some insight into what's sort of supporting that change, that focus?
So from a network backbone, we're implementing a new advanced planning software system that will basically offer to not only our employees, but our suppliers and our customers, one source of truth around the globe. So within that, a customer, farmer's ability to look and see where their combine harvester is within the complete production process in real time, there's value to them within that. There's a lot of change in terms of process and structure and approach, all healthy things for Agco and our supply network. But within that, the transitional, call it aspect of moving from somewhat, 44 business units kind of operating on independently into one integrated set of data is a lot of change. And so with that, not only in the process and the tool change, but the effects of what we're going to need on the organization of how we will play in the future from a design perspective, which chipsets are you using, thinking in mind the 40 years that you may need to support that product over the product life cycle. That's a different mindset, a different organizational approach to problem solving. So we've got a lot of work in front of us. Looking forward to it.
Christopher, I'm interested in from Stellantis in terms of that sort of process and focus, not least because you're a new organization as well, obviously with the merger and global setup. So how has that been shaped more by integrating the organization, or also looking at using some tools alongside that to improve the visibility of those risks in the supply chain?
Yeah, I think the chip crisis has really helped us focus in on where we need to go for the future. It really taught us that visibility and transparency are going to be extremely important, especially long term. We've got a lot of commodities with lead times that are over a year. So we're going to spend a lot of time and effort to create more visibility to our material releases at a part number level, 18 to 24 months out. For those tier N type suppliers, especially the chip guys. So we're working feverishly to make that happen. I think the other thing that COVID has taught us is that we're going to have to get a lot smarter in terms of the chips that we use, right? We need to, from an engineering perspective, simplify what we're doing, standardize what we're doing, reduce a lot of the complexity to give us a lot more flexibility in the environment moving forward to try and steer away from these kinds of crises in the future.
So much more focused then on that forward detailed release in that example with the chip producers, I suppose also for other levels of the tier supply chain.
Yeah, I mean from a North America perspective, we've always provided that level of detail, certainly to our tier 1 suppliers. Now we're going to expand that to the tier N suppliers. But our counterparts in Europe, so PSA, ex-Fiat, didn't necessarily have that level of visibility. Now we'll have, from a global perspective, be able to provide that transparency for everybody globally.
So it maybe in the first instance it's been also getting the European level in parallel to what was similar in North America and then expanding.
Yep.
Greg from Adient, Greg. I know from our conversations you've also been working on looking further out and providing information. I know not perhaps to that extent, but could you just share how that looks from an Adient point of view?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the winter of 21, and from an ocean freight perspective, we were caught pretty flat-footed, I'll say. I mean, we had a couple containers that were stuck in the ports, and there was nothing we could do to get them out. And at that time, our inventory was low, and we had some issues. So when I said earlier, we have to eliminate the surprises. What I mean there is there's going to be risk around every corner, and we have to understand where our containers are and where our runouts are coming up to, right? And if there's a runout within 10, 15 days, where's that container? Where's the nearest container? And at what point do we have to jump and say, okay, we have to get a plane in the air? We have to have contingency for all of these, these part numbers or all these containers. And so we pulled together a cross-functional group pretty quick. I mean, that's the only way we could do it, quickly. We're not going to implement software that quick or anything like that. So we pulled that cross-functional team together that encompassed logistics in our group, and then obviously the plants, more ops supply chain. And it's something we look at every single day now, and understanding where the risk is across the board.
Very interesting. Christopher, just to go back a bit to the Stellantis organization, when you're, with the integration, we talked about the Tier N project for visibility, but has it also strengthened other areas of the way you perhaps view the global supply chain, communicate across regions, operate with boots on the ground, for example, compared to FCA, which was already global, but now obviously is particularly with the strengthening in Europe?
Yeah, a lot bigger now. Well, we picked a heck of a time, didn't we? To try and create this big organization right in the middle of the pandemic and the chip crisis. So it certainly has delayed some of the things that we want to do from a synergies perspective, right? At least from a supply chain. Engineering is moving full speed ahead. Manufacturing is doing a lot of things. From a supply chain perspective, we're doing all the things that you would expect in this type of merger, right? We've got benchmarking activities that are going on in IBT and OBT and network design and so forth. So we're gathering up all that information to understand from a systems and process perspective, how do we really operate and where's the best practices. We've also created a global organization in each one of those pillars to help us harvest the synergy savings moving forward. So that is in place and moving forward. The other thing that we're really working on from a global purchasing perspective, we're a lot more aligned, not only from a commodity strategy and where we want to go in the future, from an operational perspective, but from a tactical perspective. Right in the middle of this crisis is what a perfect time to start to develop those tools that we want to use to be able to manage through some of the rail capacity issues we're having in North America, or the global ocean capacity issues. In the short term, frankly speaking, we've got really strong North American, South American, and Europe processes, and we've been relying on that to get through this crisis until we get more and more time to really harvest the synergies we want from a global perspective.
Yeah. Well, as you said, a difficult time to do it, but in some ways, and we'll look back on it and say it was an important time and baptism of fire, to say the least.
Yeah.
Greg, from Agco, going back to that point, perhaps for you, obviously Agco, I think you mentioned 44 different sort of organizations to get us one common source of truth. There are lots of different brands built into that. There's been many acquisitions. Has this further accelerated, I'd say, integrating that into a really global team from a logistics and supply chain point of view?
Absolutely. What we call learning experience for the last 3 years has really taught us is there's lots of opportunities to improve our business, to be more agile, to be more flexible, to be more resilient, right? The topics that we hear about all the time now. And within that, the internal desire to basically change is quite strong, believe it or not. So when you talk to the different folks that envision their role and what they do is going to change immensely in the future, they're up for that challenge, because they've been involved in design of that future state and the way it's going to work, so they've got their fingerprints on it. What a better way to go into a massive type of transformation than having the complete organization fully behind it and wanting the change, right? That's usually the opposite of what many of us run into, right? We're going to bring change. You get resistance from the body. This is the opposite. They're saying, we need to do this and we need to do it faster. Hey, that's a good thing to have.
Absolutely. Greg, from Adient, is that, for you to, example, have increased those forecasts and get that information better, is that strengthening of integration in your organization? Are you seeing a similar push as we've heard from Greg and Christopher?
Yeah, definitely. It's not my decision whether we're going to increase inventories, but luckily for me and the group, the extra safety stock has definitely helped to get through the last 2 years, and there's extra push, I will say, to correct a lot of the issues we have, or a lot of the opportunities. I will say it's also an environment that you try to be a shipper of preference, but you can't always be. There's a limit to the flexibility, and that's due to all the other issues we're talking about, the chips, the scheduling, and everything else we have. So we do try to make ourselves the shipper of preference a lot. It just, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, understood. Michael, one of the clear-cut strategies from Maersk has been to take more of an end-to-end
Yes.
integrated approach to working with your customers. How has it changed, or how is it changing your wider organization, and in particular the context how you'd work with your automotive customers?
Yeah, it's really expanding our ability to fit more into providing a solution. So specific to semiconductors, under normal times, we wouldn't be planning air freight. That would be a contingency, and I think the past 2 years, air freight was a necessity, and the prediction on our side as far as mitigating risk is you won't put too many semiconductors on the ocean, but you will on air freight. So our investment, and as far as addressing the organization, we're in an acquisition mode to fill in the areas of the end-to-end that we don't currently have today, and 2 acquisitions most recently in North America were Senator International, sorry, that was Europe, and Pilot Freight Services. And so with Pilot, and specific to servicing automotive clients transatlantic, there are 6 cargo flights dedicated per week that come in and out from Europe into the Midwest. And then at the end of, I think it's 2 more months, we're taking delivery on 3 777s that'll be part of Maersk Air, and those will fly out of Asia, Korea, China, and hopscotch over into North America as dedicated resources. So this isn't exactly new for Maersk, because Maersk Air does exist today with 16 767 cargo aircrafts that support a major integrator in Europe. And so the plan is to 2030 is to bring in those assets most immediately on the short term, but by 2030 we'll have quite a global network of air freight as either contingency or in high tech and semiconductors, probably a planned thing. Pilot also brought us a great capability that we lacked and is bringing along the U.S.-Mexico border. So for automotive, being able to manage that process both northbound and southbound is a really expanded horizon and a huge opportunity for us to service automotive and industrial manufacturing. So as far as providers of choice, I heard that mentioned, and I think we're looking for that as well. We're looking for companies that want to go on this journey with us, and if we collaborate and spar a little bit, and we find a solution to understand what we can provide, that's an ideal scenario where it moves a little bit away from the procurement mentality that we have a tendency to get in, but more strategic, and then look at a longer term growth partnership. So it's quite exciting times, and if you walked by our booth and you saw this big screen, we're playing videos and kind of showing this. We're really in the business of bringing on and making those companies part, not turnarounds, but really part of that end-to-end, specific to technology, which is also real exciting. And yes, I'm commercial, so I'm kind of a commercial here. But there's something called TradeLens that's a software solution that we provide today, and it's blockchain technology, and so it relies on all the carriers, forwarders, sharing their information to gain visibility, and I don't have our number of members now, but I know the rail in North America is covered at 100% sharing the data. So there's a one version of the truth as far as the inland that you can get around your containers today. So just a few areas.
Thanks, Michael. Greg, at Agco, coming back on I think under your responsibilities include sales and operation planning, so S&OP. That's a function that throughout this period we've spoken with numerous companies about how important it's clearly become, balancing, managing capacities, supply capacities, coordinating across organizations. Perhaps needing to strengthen in some automotive organizations where it didn't previously, wasn't as strong. So I'm just interested from your point of view, has that been the case? Has it changed and evolved further during this period to help mitigate risk?
So that's a very interesting question, and from a global perspective, maybe a couple different answers. But for us, what's really happened is it's forced us to understand that retail customer much more clearly. Historically, our dealer networks would have, tractors and combines sitting on their lots, right? And the customers would come in and pick out the ones they want for, let's just say, 90% of the transactions. Today, that's closer to 77, 78% of the transactions are billed to a retail order. And within that, the ability to deliver to the customer on time in a seasonal type setting becomes quite critical. And as a result of that, what we found is we we really, as an organization, feel the need that we need to improve how we manage things, how we plan things, how we execute. And that's part of what I mentioned earlier, the need from the organization to change, or the desire to change. That is being orchestrated through the S&OP process, because it does touch everything from the dealer, the retail customer, all the way to the N-X within the supply network. And for us, it is kind of an interesting question: why is a supply chain person leading S&OP? Because so much of the activity that has to happen is very similar to what you do within supply chain. What do I need? When's it got to be there? What am I planning? What do I have? What do I don't have? A lot of the same questions. So within that, S&OP during these challenging times is for sure a challenge, but it's a learning opportunity for organizations to understand what they can truly do and take how you operate in this environment to a future state where things are a bit more stable. You should really be able to unlock a tremendous amount of value from your organization and deliver that to your upstream value chain.
Christopher, some of that obviously would sound familiar in terms of the lead times and build to order. I was just wondering, for you, is it also working more closely with S&OP functions within Stellantis, and how it impacts ultimately on supply chain?
I mean, for sure, supply chain has always run the S&OP process for us.
Yeah.
That's always been a staple of how we've operated. But yeah, every month, week in and week out, we are integrated within the S&OP process. There's no doubt about it. We're dealing with COVID impacting our workforce, impacting how many vehicles we're going to build and when we're going to build those vehicles. Chips doing the same kind of thing. And our job is to figure out, how do we support the customers, right? We're responsible for import and export operations, for instance, of all of our vehicles. And making sure we build them on time so that we have enough time from an in-transit perspective to get it to the ports, to make sure we schedule it with the vessel times that are always changing or typically falling back for us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Is a real challenge for us, and it's a collaborative effort between our scheduling department, our sales and marketing department. It's quite the effort to try and start over every month to be able to meet those customer demands.
Yeah.
And then we're doing the same thing on imports, managing with our colleagues in China and Europe and Brazil, the same kinds of activities, but a reverse flow, so that we're making sure that we're meeting the expectations of customers in Mexico and North America.
Greg from Adient, I mean, we talked about how you're looking to communicate more in advance, but clearly you're also having, I'm sure, to react quickly to changes that customers like Stellantis and others are having to change to. So how is that changing and shaping how you run your logistics?
I don't know what you're talking about. We love no, I mean, it goes downhill. It rolls downhill, right? So when we find out late on a Thursday or Friday that one of our customers is going to be down the next week, I mean, sometimes, honestly, it's helped us because of ocean freight that's been stuck, and I'm like, whew, thank you. But other times, yeah, it's tough, because then we have to call our truckload carriers, let's say, and we're not running next week, and so they're thinking, well, I can make much more money somewhere else, right? And so that's one thing that is negatively affected. But it rolls downhill, and the issues that they have with their supply base, we're going to feel it. But not to sound corny, but we are all in this together. We're all trying to get the same job done, and we're all dealing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to make sure the audience has opportunities if there's any questions or comments. And also, if anyone sat at the back wants to sit, there are some seats up front. Feel free to filter through. Well, if at any point you have a question, just put a hand up. We'll have mics going around the room. One of the things we spoke about, back on the topic of mitigating risk, so right at the beginning of the event yesterday, for those of you who might not have been there, we talked with, in this case, General Motors, about buying insurance policy, capacity for ocean and air, sort of reserving capacity more in advance, not even using all of it. We established pretty clearly that for tier ones, this isn't really an option from a sort of working capital point of view. But I'm just interested if that is a common process to Christopher Stellantis. Has that been an approach you've also taken to mitigate risk on key modes?
Not really.
Okay.
As part of a normal course of business, we have looked at that kind of stuff on where we're going to have an issue from a short-term perspective, but it's really not part of the normal part of our business. We're going with the established routes, the established capacity. So no, not really.
Yeah.
Not really an initiative for us.
Yeah. For Agco, similar or different?
We're very aggressive in that space.
Okay.
Because, again, the products that we're having to move are supplying the food chain, and we need to keep that run to the best of our ability. So, there's folks in this room that understand when I say we're aggressive on this. We are planning our capacities out, 12 weeks, start focusing on the confirmations that we need to get. Where we don't, we start going out to the market, to folks like my friend here on the left, and finding solutions. And at times that's not cheap, but at the end of the day, we need to keep the flow rolling and keep the food chain cooking so that people are not without the basic necessities to live. And that takes planning and execution, because failure is not acceptable at all.
And Michael, for you, has that been, you gave some examples earlier about that integration with air and having that sort of capacity, but in general, is it an approach you've been taking with automotive and other customers to be a bit more aggressive in the space?
On the destination side, so once the vessel arrives, there's been a lot of focus in it, and I know although it didn't sound like it happened here, inventory buildup to try to mitigate that was an issue. And what actually happened or happens is it makes the ability to get the equipment back to the port and getting the ships and keeping it moving. If you hold your equipment and you build your inventory and don't do that, it kind of hurts the market. And so what we really focused a lot on, and I see this ongoing as well, is transloading even depot solutions where we could get the containers off the chassis, and then even further look at line sequencing and delivering, setting up a situation with warehousing where we're getting the parts to the line in a timely manner. So definitely saw bottlenecks there, and in terms of what we were talking about earlier, I think there was a big rush on everybody's part. I need capacity, and forecasting kind of went by the wayside. So I mentioned earlier, I don't think we made everybody happy, but we did stand by the longer term customer and the longer term approach on that. And just going forward, I think we're all going to be pushed for sustainability and some of those things that also need to play in. And on the Maersk side, another 2-year-old acquisition performance team, we've got a 25 million square foot warehouse footprint with electronic vehicles that we're running in Southern California right now, tractors. I think 44 roughly of those that we're going to continue to grow. So I think as a risk, and sorry, I might be stealing material from later on in the questioning, but it's going to be pressure on all of us as providers and also manufacturers that we're going to have to reduce the carbon footprint. So, sustainability and coming up with those types of solutions are going to be important too, and that's another thing that we're planning for longer term.
Absolutely. Christopher mentioned earlier that the Stellantis is extending the planning and the visibility for the tier N supply chain. I just wanted to throw that back to some of the other panel members as well to understand how it may look, Greg, for Adient, obviously with your own lower tiers. Is it becoming a bigger focus to get that visibility? And sorry to add to the question, but perhaps also in coordination with your OEMs where they may have directed supply and coordination there too.
Yeah, when there's an issue, let's say, our OEMs come to us and survey us on what we're doing to fix the problem or to keep supply. And likewise, we do work with our tiers, a couple of them down, and try to make sure that we aren't going to be affected, because if we're affected by them, then we're going to affect our customer, and it doesn't really matter whose fault it is at that point. And so we definitely do, whether it's my group or our ops supply chain group, our procurement group. There definitely is collaboration with our tiers.
Greg, at Agco?
Same thing. We've seen for, I would say, going on 34 months, the big need to extend the forecast horizon as well as the accuracy. And we've taken significant strides in both areas. looking at the forecast accuracy that we provide and then the duration of that time horizon to our suppliers is vital to the stability, but also enables our partners to plan their crazy supply chains, right? It's labor, it's raw material, it's transportation, it's energy. Energy, you're gonna hear a lot more about that in the next several months. All of those things that you pretty much can't operate your business without. So this is part of our commitment to help ourselves and our supply network. Providing that visibility of 18 to 24 months has been something we focused on, and the feedback we've gotten has been very positive, but still improvement to go.
And Christopher, as you extend this visibility and focus, is that largely through coordination, communication, cascading down? Is it combined with tools or other tools that you're using to capture some of that?
Yeah, initially it's been more of a manual process, but we are inventing a new system where we're going to be plugging into our legacy supply chain systems. We're going to plug into our advanced engineering system. We're working with a third party to pull all this together to be able to communicate these requirements to suppliers at the right level at the right time. So it's probably going to take us another year or so to pull all that together, but it's definitely going to be required. And our initial focus has always been about the chip suppliers and providing that kind of feedback, but supply chains for a lot of our commodities have that year-long or longer cycle time. So we're going to need to provide that visibility to a lot of strategic suppliers for sure going forward.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's to come up on that. It's been mentioned a few times perhaps some trade-offs in levels of inventory to balance risk as well. It's clearly some strategy that multiple manufacturers have talked about. Christopher, I just want to go back to you on that, as well as that's been similar for Stellantis for certain key commodities as well.
Yeah, for the most part, working capital is still king in our organization globally. So no, we're not necessarily adding that buffer stock from a parts perspective at all. Obviously, we're monitoring in transits, whether it be rail, truck, and we'll make modifications accordingly based on the actual in transits versus what our planned in transits are. Certainly, if we have a known peak for powertrains or for battery vehicles, we're going to build some banks to be able to support that. But as a normal process, no, we're not going to. We're going to focus in on minimizing our working capital moving forward.
Yeah. So, Greg, at Agco, I'm sure that working capital is still key for you too, but I think have you been also more aggressive in this space in terms of where you might need to increase some inventory?
Strongly. And it's part of a shift. I mean, working capital obviously is a very, very critical thing to any business, especially in these wild times. But what we've been able to do is convert where we invested. So where we used to have finished goods that were available, now we have it in raw material. Net to the organization, it's the same level, but the impact to the organization is flexibility and business continuity as the insurance policy. So
yeah,
very quickly accepted by the senior leadership.
And at Adient, sort of by necessity, or have you also, in some cases, by design, done the same?
Yep. We, obviously, third person to say it, working capital is so important, right? But, our transit's just ballooned up, right? And so we have to protect our customers, and so we are strategic about where we increase, but we are increasing. And, we were also increasing, for a potential strike on the West Coast.
Yeah.
That we kind of changed our way after some news came out. But that was something a year ago that we were planning on. So, yeah, we've are strategic about it, but are doing it where it needs to happen.
Yeah. I know someone reminded me painfully over dinner last night. It's a tentative agreement, so perhaps can't fully relax on that. But obviously, the worst was averted at least. Christopher, I know that at Stellantis, and previously at FCA and Chrysler, total cost of ownership and landed cost equations certainly have long existed, include logistics and try to obviously cost that appropriately. But again, do you see a risk factor, keeping that as becoming a stronger element, or could become a stronger element in influencing some of those total landed cost considerations?
Yeah, I mean, interesting for us. Yeah, we are, right? We don't have a magical formula that we are using. It's probably commodity based. It's regionally based on where we're going to be sourcing the commodities. We have expanded that scope for USMCA and the risk for USMCA going forward. So again, no magical formula, but we have our customs people that help provide feedback on sourcing, on how that's going to ultimately impact USMCA. So I wish there was a formula, to be honest with you. It would be very useful because we'd be able to standardize it and do it for all sourcing going forward. But right now we're relying on attacking the key commodities that we know we've historically had issues with. But certainly it's an important dialogue that we're going to have in those sourcing tables.
And on the USMCA, is that to also track things that might, not meet the levels, or which might have to, with the labor requirements, the complexities that come into
RVC and LVC, right?
Yeah,
So we're
right.
looking at making both of those.
Right, understood. Yeah. Again, Greg at Agco, how or I'm not saying have you cracked the magic formula, or you're adapting it to see what level risk can or should play in influencing that total landed cost?
So on the TCO, we've got let's just say for a number of years, there was always a challenge from a purchasing performance is it the cost or the total landed cost? So first we said it's the total landed cost. From there, we basically integrated a tool that provides the buyer with here's what your landed costs are in terms of packaging, in terms of freight costs and customs, inventory, risk. There's a risk factor in there as well. That all gets formulated into their, let's call it RFQ comparison. So we automated all that for them. We updated, I believe, on a quarterly basis with the latest costs. And as a result of that, we're seeing much smarter decision-making and or recommendations in what we do. For the large critical components, the sourcing decision, we sit on that, call it sourcing bench, and we have the ability to veto, but we've seen the veto requirement go down significantly since we've empowered the team to make the right recommendation because they've got the right data. So it's been valuable for us.
Anything you'd add on that, for Adient?
No, I mean, I know it's obviously the risk, I think, is a great point. That's something that leadership is understanding, and obviously the cost structure has definitely changed. So, those conversations are happening, and our group has been more a part of those than I think we used to be. So I think we're making headway there.
Yeah. Well, as we just said yesterday, we become more popular with CFOs. Next year, we're going to try and get a few of them to this event as well. We've got about 5 minutes with the panel before lunch. Is there any comment or question? Oh, right here in the front, actually. Can we have a microphone here in the front, please? And it is on the way. I know we probably could hear you, but we do have an online audience that we want to make sure can hear you as well. So we'll just wait for the mic. There it is, right here.
Thank you, Chris. So we all know the importance of wheels on the pavement and truck capacity. Nothing moves without a truck around the United States right now. And with the ever-increasing age of the commercial motor drivers, we need to build the pipeline and recruit. Christopher mentioned some creative ways of expanding capacity using existing truck capacity. Can I hear the panel's thoughts on building recruiting opportunities as well as utilization of existing truck capacity?
Why don't we start with Greg at Adient?
I asked a couple people that I know out there for softballs. This is a difficult question. I think from a tier perspective here, I mean, I think it's important to be a shipper of preference. I kind of said it earlier, right? And so, we can't keep the trucks on our yards or our suppliers' yards waiting to load them, right? Because the drivers are not making money doing that. So I think we need to be better and help ourselves ultimately and get freight moving. There's not the equipment that there used to be, and I'm not just speaking from my perspective, but I mean everybody sees it. you shouldn't be using, warehouse on wheels everywhere anymore. I mean, the game has changed, and we have to understand that. And we have to put pressure on our plants, and I think be more flexible to, keep the drivers happy.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, not a clear answer. Certainly during the pandemic, there was a shortage of recruitment, and I think that's what you're talking about, recruiting people that want to drive trucks. Is that correct? As well as equipment. And to his point, it's kind of both, because you've got to bring somebody in and I think offer a career and a competitive wage and those sorts of things that are at the core of recruiting. And the electric trucks are pretty cool. But yeah, I think there needs to be an effort to recruit more into our industry. And I think with that, driving and to his point, driving efficiencies, wait times, and I think with the younger coming into the workforce in early 20s, it's a long haul truck to be out of town for a week or so. There's been some studies that, hey, if we can shorten that, have team drivers and so forth, just to try to make ourselves more attractive as an industry to come in. And I'm not sure if they're in the room, and definitely not maybe for driving, but we do have Michigan State University students that are here in the conference, and I thought that was great to see. When I started, there wasn't a advanced degree in logistics and supply chain, and now to see that, it's great. So yeah, it's sorry, not a great answer, but we do have to recruit and make sure we don't lose focus of that. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything. Chris, you started us off on that topic. If there's anything you'd add beyond it, we made it very clear that we need that pipeline, and it's not obvious immediately where the source is.
Yeah, I mean, if the pipeline is, I think, the most important part. Like, where are we going to find that? Is number one. But I think some of the comments that we've made in terms of how we operate is extremely important. That waiting time is huge. Tying up trailers is huge. Warehouse on wheels, I think I heard, right? That's huge. I think getting people home every night is a big thing, right? And that's maybe a little bit easier to do in our industry from a dry van perspective, but probably a lot harder to do from an auto haul away.
Yeah.
And that's where my focus has been. How are we going to be able to do that? So, it's a lot cheaper to move a vehicle via rail in those long distances versus having these drivers spending 2-3 days on the road to make their deliveries. It's a problem. It really is. It's just geography. We're not too big of a country, right, to get the vehicles everywhere we need to.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to make suggestions about how we reduce the size of the country. We'll leave that for other forums. We're coming towards the end here. This has been a great discussion. I just want to close it with perhaps looking a little bit ahead, and not because we're mitigating risks, so we'll keep it a little bit more focused on the immediate term. One is like the next 6-12 months. I guess two-part question. One is, do you feel more prepared for whatever the next whatever the next risk or crisis comes? Do you at least feel more prepared in managing it? And I guess along with that, then, what's your top takeaway action point over the next, say, months to a year to help to further mitigate risk? I'll start with you, Michael. Do you feel more prepared?
Yeah, to answer straight away, I think it would be overzealous to say we feel confident. It's always one of my favorite things to say is success is never final. Once you feel like I'm successful, then it changes again. But I am confident in terms of adding. If you would have come to in fact, I asked this question today, what's your current understanding of Maersk? And generally, whatever you get back gives you a great starting point for the conversation. So the confidence to take some of the connections end to end, combine that with technology, and I think Greg had a great point that I'm taking with me, is the energy. You need people to make it happen for you, because visibility is great, and we talk about that and how I have this data and that data. But what does that actually mean, and how does that translate, and how do we execute on that? So from that perspective, I think in a collaboration with the members on the panel, I think that would be an optimistic view of the future. So yes, I guess through my talk, I got a little more confident.
That's great. Look at that. I'm glad we could help. Greg from Agco.
So for us, chips are one of the top things we're working on.
Yeah.
We've got a great work stream that's going to help us understand that a lot better long term. Secondly is going to be where the potential risk could be with chips and other things. possibly in Asia in the near future, and where are we at from a business continuity perspective if something happens? If something happens, or when something happens. So for us, that's on the front burner, and maybe more in the short term, it's what's going to happen this winter in Europe with energy.
Yeah.
For those of you that do business in Germany, Italy, and that part of the world, that's very fragile, very fragile. And what is it you can do? There's not much you can do when your supply network, our supply networks collectively, are running pretty much full speed. They can't hire enough people, which means you can't build up inventory to do the what ifs. So there's a lot of risk out there on the horizon. Some you can manage, some maybe not so well. But the first thing is to understand what's out there to be able to align your organization to respond if required.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think I'm tentatively confident. I think we've had so much experience with it. But one thing that we really kind of haven't talked too much about is partnerships, and I think we have partnered with we have some good partnerships with some carriers, some forwarders, suppliers who they advocate for us. They escalate to us. I mean, we are, after all, in logistics, right? Stuff happens, and you need that communication. And if, when we have a container stuck, let's say, I can trust our partnerships to advocate for my company. And I think that's just so important, more important than ever, I think. So I feel pretty confident.
Great. Final thoughts, Chris?
We had an opportunity to do something about the chip crisis back when we had the tsunami and Japan was hit. And we didn't learn our lesson at that time. We had years of time to be able to fix these issues. We're going to get it now. We get it. We're going to fix it going forward for sure. We're going to have another crisis. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know when it's going to be, but for sure we're going to have it. I think the number one thing that I agree with Greg is the partnership is extremely important. Secondly, there needs to be transparency and visibility. And then third, and most importantly, and I think this is another lesson learned from the latest crisis, from the chip crisis, there needs to be trust, right? From a supply base, from a carrier partnership perspective, from OEMs, we need to trust each other going forward. And if you do those three things, we're going to get through the next crisis for sure. But if we start off not doing that, we're going to have some problems to begin with. So I think we need to go into the next crisis with that kind of mentality.
I think that's an excellent point to end on, emphasizing that need for trust. I hope that events like this, gatherings like this, can help to facilitate that. Maybe we need to do some of those exercises where we have someone fall off a stage and get caught.
First.
We just have to make sure that certain people aren't getting pushed off. No, but I fully agree, and I think this is echoed across. There's great points here. I think in a conference that could almost all be about mitigating disruption and risk, we really hit on some of the very key strategic points today. And so I really want to thank everyone on the panel for your time and for this discussion. Thank you.